On the computer. Okay, so welcome. Tonight, I want to go through some things for you to think about. As I was saying to Steve, I went back and listened to your first week presentations. It was kind of interesting because, when I listened to them again, what I was finding almost common through all of them was the sense that when you listen to Young Zhao, you listen to Will Richardson, and obviously the other ones past that with Linda Darling Hammonds, and what you're listening to this week, I think will be kind of interesting with Bill Gates and particularly the rebuttal by Bill Whitaker. So the sense I'm getting is, and I know this, through all my years as superintendent and, in teaching the whole bit, is that we know the system has to change, but we have no idea how to do it. And if you remember from your courses in 800, 845 or 625, I don't remember if the 625 course, which was Theory U, was changed to 845 yet. And then when you think about what you had in 801, 802, all those different courses, that really what we're trying to get you guys particularly to become will be those transformational agents that can move us off the dime to where we have to go in the future. And I think that's very important. And my sense is that there seemed to be, this idea around standards. And hopefully when if you haven't listened to Gates yet, it's kind of an interesting point of view, particularly the second one where the Washington Post individual really starts drilling into his concepts about it, and his persistence on trying to get her to understand that the questions that she was asking were all politically driven as opposed to educationally driven, which I thought was kind of interesting listening to what he was saying. But generally, again, when you go back and think about systems thinking, you think about the iceberg, you think about Theory U in how you allow possibilities for the future to emerge. And then you think about design thinking and the concepts related to how do you get divergent thinking to become an integral part to a divergent organization that mainly functions on divergent thinking, or convergent thinking, excuse me. I wish it did function more on divergent, but it functions on an A to B to C to D, and it really has lost what maybe its focus is all about. So as curriculum leaders, what I really want to take you into a little bit tonight is to go back to the Russell Ackoff book. Now, I don't know if all of you had that at the time when you took 800, Learning Right Side Up. That's the Russell Ackoff Greenberg book, which now is a core book along with the Senge book, a couple of Senge books, and off of Heifetz and Linsky, a little bit of Fullen thrown in. So I'm going to take you through this a little bit and to kind of get you into thinking more of a philosophical point of view, because why I want you to start thinking about it from what curriculum is about from a philosophical point of view, it will help you greatly as you explore the Gredler book and begin to kind of tease out what underlies your thinking about curriculum, but more importantly, who might be influencing your concepts of learning. So this week, you're dealing with behavioralism, and you have a long, movie, by Skinner, but I want to make sure that you get a sense of Skinner, because what's so interesting about behavioralism is it is the dominant underlying philosophy or psychology of American education. And those of you who teach special education should know that greatly. And so it's something, that as we go through this, I really want to explore. And also, when I taught 800, and when I still teach 800, one of the things is I always go back to that 1970 book by Robert Pirsig, who just died recently, The Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And what that book was all about is, I think, in essence, is that this is the area you need to think about. That if a factory's torn down, but the rationality that produced it is left standing, all we're going to simply do is produce another factory. And so my sense is, I want you to think about that, because the frustration I heard in a lot of your week one presentations is basically the fact that as you think about Young Zhao's ideas, because you all said, yeah, it's good, product-based for learning, moving there, what Will Richardson is saying about kids, how you begin to look at those, and then the international comparisons that Linda Darling-Hammonds brings up, Alan November's work, etc., is that the problem is most of you are dealing with people who will mouth the concept of reform and curricular change, but the problem is they have not explored the rationality that has built the system that we have right now. So I think that's important for you, particularly as doctoral students, as you look at this, and actually more importantly, as you interact with your colleagues within your own work environments. And particularly as you're moving towards getting that thing called a letter of eligibility, which will allow you to become a superintendent who is, I'm going to put this in quotes, is in charge of that type of structure. And so I think this concept is important to think about. And that the other thing is what Russell Akoff was talking about in that book, Learning Right Side Up. And if you did not have it as a text in 800, I'm going to strongly suggest that you get it, because it's a very, very interesting book in relationship to, to understanding what's going on. And the comparison here, I think, of the American Heritage Dictionary and the Oxford English Dictionary about what education is. So if you look at those two, tell me, what you see as being different about them.
So with the American Heritage definition, I see, I see the student as passive. So the teacher is like just pushing this, this learning on you. This is what you're going to know. This is, I'm giving it to you. Whereas the Oxford English definition appears to be more where the student's more active. I guess that's the simplest way I could put it. Where they are thinking, they are responding, and the teacher is just what it says, drawing out from the student. I reckon what they already know, and perhaps marrying it with new knowledge.
Okay. Other thoughts, or as you look at those two?
I agree with Steve. If you look at just the American Heritage definition, it just sounds like it's already there, like imparting knowledge, the known, and even the term systematic instruction. And then you go to the verbiage with the Oxford English, and it's more of a facilitating, a coaching, a leading, and eliciting. So it's a different impression. It has a different tone as well.
Yeah, the American Heritage one really, I think, is the one that most of you react against when you talk about how standards drive everything that's going on. And the Oxford Dictionary one, if you think about it, is more attuned to, if you remember what Peter Senge talked about leadership as being, that leadership is stepping over. It comes from the old word leath, which leads over, step over the threshold to die. And then if you think about theory U, as you go down the U, that you let go of the downloading in order to allow for the field to lead out, to let go, to let come. So when you begin to think about this, I think, as leaders within organizations, and if you become a superintendent and you have that responsibility, is that, to me, this is a real important distinction that you need to wrestle with in terms of yourself first. So if you think about Sharma, when he talked about finding your source of who you are as a leader, well, you also need to find out where your source about education is. But the thing you have to keep in mind, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, in terms of the downloading, is remember, we are all products of this system. And that's what makes it difficult to change, because we've experienced it. All your parents, all the legislators, all of the business people generally are products of the system. So the tendency is that all we know is what we know and what we've experienced, and to try to come up with different approaches, like what Young Zhao's talking about, Will Richardson or Alan November. That's difficult to shape because the mental models are so powerful within the culture itself. So that's why I think looking at these two definitions, they're important to think about in relationship to your thinking about, okay, what's the purpose of education? What is it? And then when you begin to think about curriculum as the structure of that information, that's what becomes important. So I'd like you to really keep that in mind, because then what they do is, if you go back, and as I said, I'm going to take a little philosophical journey, is take a look at how the Greek philosophers saw it, and then look at, what our founding fathers, and particularly Jefferson, thought about in terms of us as an emerging culture. So look at those two and tell me how they play out in your thinking. So tell me about, the Greek point of view and the Jeffersonian point of view, which is etched in our Declaration of Independence.
Well, I think that both of them kind of correspond to what a lot of our resources have been in terms of, for our class, in terms of, exactly, Stacy just typed, personalized learning, and in individualization, and really looking at strengths and talents of individual students and how we foster those within education.
Or attempt to foster them.
Right.
Yeah, okay. What about that term there, the pursuit of happiness? And how that might fit into, Zhao or Richardson or Alan November?
Well, I think that the pursuit of happiness in this instance means, going out and finding what you're passionate about, what makes that says it there at the bottom, which gives them meaning, gives your life meaning. What is it that drives you, that makes you want to be the best person that you can be? That in turn is happiness in some respects. So I equate it to, I think it was Zhao, when he was talking about creating our own jobs. Basically, the students that we have now are really, they're going to be a society of makers, that they're making their own job, they're making their own careers. And that to me is kind of the connection to the pursuit of happiness.
Okay. All right, good.
I remember too, when Yang Zhao was writing about sausages, making sausage. And so I kind of see the pursuit of happiness piece as the opposite of that, that you have the right to be whatever kind of meat you are, rather being ground into a perfect sausage like everyone else.
I like that's good. Now remember, this will be on YouTube. So you have the right to be the type of meat you want to be. I think that's great. Yeah. No, yeah, that's it. It's, who we are. Now think about what Otto Scharmer was looking at in relationship to discovering the true self. Remember if you remember when he talked about going down to the bottom of the U, what presencing is understanding the self, the small s, versus the larger S in relationship to who we are and how we interconnect with our environment and ourselves. So if you think about these two as guiding principles, obviously our founding fathers were influenced greatly by the philosophy of, the Greeks, and John Locke and people of that nature. And when you think of John Locke and the 17th century philosophers who were influenced by the Greeks. So that idea of full potential is there. The question, though, that we have to constantly keep asking ourselves, given our present situation, and particularly if you work in an urban environment, and it's true, as some of you said, work in rural environments, and I've worked in rural environments myself, question is, are we preparing these kids to seek out meaning that will make them happy, as an institution? You don't need to answer that now. I just want to throw that out because that becomes a very important component as we think about this. Then throw on Ken Robertson, and I'm sure you've seen his videos all over the place. But, I think what he talks about is all right, so we're looking at our pursuit of happiness. We are, self-governing, but we also have a common good. Well, Ken Robinson says, we are different and diverse, but curiosity is natural to all children, and it really is what leads to achievement, and that life is inherently creative. And I know a couple of you talked in your statements about how do we foster creativity when we are, I'm going to paraphrase this, when we are constrained by certain sets of standards that are embedded in the curriculum, that drive the textbooks that we buy, etc. How then do we become, fostering this idea of creativity, even though, we're beginning to see that to emerge with maker spaces and things of that nature. And I won't say that someone said at times you have to be subversive, but then again, his statement goes back to a book that was written back in the 80s about teaching as a subversive activity. So, it is, to one extent, teachers within the system itself are up against the machine, so to speak, pulling a little bit out of Pink Floyd in The Wall. So think about it from that point of view. So basically, though, what you need to think about is these types of questions again, and I don't know if you did have this book, but these are, I think, important questions that each one of you, and then even within your team, need to think about as you play around with a restructuring of the design of curriculum and what it is, knowing what the present reality of it is. Okay, because that's important. It's going to be there. But so many of you raise the issue is, how do we shift the thinking that's going to be necessary for the 21st century? And quite frankly, a lot of the kids that you're teaching right now will be alive in the 22nd century. So we'll just add that little burden onto you, especially those of you who are teaching in elementary school. Those kids are going to be living in the 22nd century. They just will be, because the advancements of medicine and bioengineering and all those things. So just to add a little pressure there is that you're not just preparing them for the 21st century, which is the buzzword we use. I also want you to think out there that a lot of those kids are going to be alive in the 22nd century, of which we have no idea of what it's going to look like. So these, and I'll send you these slides. I'll attach them to the video tonight. But I think these are the things that we need to really, think about as we're trying to say what information needs to be given to all kids, and what other forms of information are there for those kids that want to specialize in it. So the question that many of you have to think about is, and right now structurally, we have the concept, if you remember, when you were in school, and probably a lot of your schools still have it, is this idea of tracking. And so what are the consequences of tracking when we're trying to deal with an environment that demands that people be literate in so many different fields? They don't necessarily have to be experts, like they don't have to be mathematicians, or they don't have to be scientists, but they have to have mathematical literacy. They have to have they have to have scientific literacy because of the complexity environments in which they're going to live in. So again, how do you deal with GMOs right now? How do you deal with nanotechnology? How do you deal with end-of-life issues? How do you deal with the integration of technology into our bodies? So these are the types of questions that are going to face our kids, and they're going to face us also as educators. More so you than probably me, but that's just the quality of age, I guess one might put it that way. So these questions, I think, become important for you to think about. Any comments about what you see there right now? Okay, not hearing any, let's move on. And if you think of some, you can do later. So again, this comes out of 800, that what we're talking about is in the 20th century, science itself is moving away from the industrial model or the Newtonian way of thinking about science, and is becoming more, I'm going to use it this way, ecologically oriented in terms of science that's been driven by quantum physics and nanotechnology and things of that nature. But what we're also beginning to understand is that organizations themselves, and this is what Peter Senge was talking about, and Fedor Capra and people like that, is that really we need to think about our schools as living systems, and that they need to constantly adapt, and they have to allow their structures to function more web-like with their surroundings. So when Zhao talks about global connections of kids, that changes it, of which our technology allows us to do that more and more. And that the process that we're really trying to foster in the learning process is the ability to be adaptable, to understand diversity, and I'm talking about diversity of thoughts and ideas, and to be creative. And these are the processes that are necessary for our organizations to continue to function in the 21st century because of technology, et cetera. So again, what I'm posing for you as you think about, your final project, particularly in your teams, as you're talking about this, that when you go back and look at this seems to be the underlying premises of organizational design, whether it be in schools or businesses, the military, churches, or whatever, even family structures, is that we're moving away from hierarchical structures to more web-like networks within the organization and with the organization to its surroundings. And so as emerging leaders, you need to, kind of begin to say, well, all right, but what does that mean to me right now when I look at the organization I work in? Wow, how does that stack up to the present reality, and what would have to happen to move us towards that? So any comments or questions related to what I just threw up there on that slide? Make perfect sense?
It actually does, Dr. Gould. I think I agree with the statement you mentioned about getting away from the the hierarchy of what it is that we do. And even as an educator, I see myself growing from this teacher knows, and I'm telling parents, and I'm telling kids, and we're working together. And you mentioned the technology, and so within the last few years, I've used social media a lot to bring all of us together. Teacher, parents, kids, we are all on the same exact platforms. And that is one way that it's become more web-like, where I'm eliciting information from them, they're getting things from me, we're sharing, we're talking, we're conversing, in addition to what it is that we do in the classroom.
Good. Okay. All right. So with that then, one of the things that you need to think about in terms of curriculum ideology and begin to look at yourselves in relationship to this is that you have a scholar academic approach to this as an ideology. So the purpose of education is to get these kids to accumulate knowledge. And again, if you think about as you're exposed to Common Core or any of the standardized approaches or what's emerging out of the new science standards, et cetera, a lot of those do come out of scholar academic ideology. So if you go back and think about what you said, what your mental models around curriculum are, here's a new set of lenses to begin to think about where you fall into this spectrum. Second one then would be social efficiency. So really our purpose is to get kids, trained in these skills that they're going to need to function in a workplace and at home, and to get the pursuit of happiness, actually. That we give them the necessary social skills so that they can really participate in society. So one of the complaints today, right now, leveled against schools, given the political divide in this country, is what? Leveled against schools.
Devos?
Say what? Explain yourself on that.
I'm teasing.
Well, now think about what's the subject that people are screaming about we don't teach anymore in schools, which I don't know is necessarily true. What's the one subject?
Writing?
No, political divide in this country. It begins with a C.
Creationism?
No.
Oh. Cursive?
That was created, yes, that does create a political divide, but it's, come on,
Cursive,
go to Jefferson and go to the Greeks and,
cursive writing?
no,
Oh, okay. I'm guessing now. Okay.
no, man, this is good. Okay, I got the answer, and your job is to guess what it is. Civics!
And I was going to say social studies, but
Okay, well, that's close to C. All right, that's good. No, but my point is that people are really complaining about is people have no concept of how we function in a democracy, in a society. So what you're hearing a lot about the divide from pundits and people like that is, well, we don't teach civics anymore. I mean, I read letters to the editor all the time. I love reading letters to the editor because you get a really good pulse within your community. And I constantly see that, we don't teach civics anymore. It's not part of it. I remember 12th grade, I think I had civics. And that was a long, long time ago. But anyway, one of the things is, so are you more scholar academic oriented? Are you social efficiency oriented? Or are you learner centered? Which is the purpose of the curriculum then really is to look at the growth of the individual and in harmony to their uniqueness. Now, if you think about what Young Zhao talks about, he probably falls within that framework, because what he's talking about is making sure we can tap into the abilities of individual people, let them emerge. The school's design needs to be designed to allow that to happen. So it becomes learner-centered. And then the last one is social reconstruction. They assume the purpose of education is really to construct new and more just societies as we go along. And again, when you look at those four, you probably can see some interesting parallels, from a historical point of view, as you look at the history of the country itself, how social reconstruction emerged through our period of time, going back to the Civil War, all the way through Reconstruction, all the way through civil rights movements, and now the civil rights movements have taken on a whole different approach as it looks at personal self and looking at the personal preference and diversity in terms of people, whether it be sexual preferences or race preferences or whatever it is. So the question is, from a curricular point of view, is there, do you have a tendency to look at social reconstruction as the design of the curriculum? Is it learner-centered, or is it scholarly, or is it the emotional side? So I think these four are important for your team to kind of tease out and to think about, but more importantly, it's more important for you to think about where you fall within these frameworks as you explore your own leadership development. So any comments, questions, about those four, about the ideologies? Okay, so with that, then I'm sure you guys remember this. So I just want, and I'm throwing this back out here for you just to think about it again, of what happens, particularly when you watch the two videos. You watch the Bill Gates video and you watch the Whitaker video. That I like you to think about it in relationship to where, they are in terms of their discussion of, the voice of judgment, the voice of cynicism, and the voice of fear, and how that plays out. But what also is important, because so many of you in your little discussions about your own mental models, is that, again, the voice of fear seems to be a strong point that seems to stop us from moving forward. Maybe not you individually, but collectively within our organizations. So again, I just wanted to throw this back up there for you to think about the Theory U framework, because it's a good framework for you to kind of jump back into, to trying to understand why it's difficult to make the types of changes that I think, philosophically and mentally you feel we need to make, but you run up against a brick wall, and that's the reality of what goes on daily within the organization. So again, I'd like you to review that and think about it as a tool to help you to really understand what type of curriculum we really should be looking at. Okay? Any comments or questions related back to why I'm linking you back into this? And it's both you and the you into this process, and also thinking about the iceberg from a structural point of view also. So again, a couple things to think about. Why is it hard to change? These particular ideas here about industrialism, because we all talk about the schools or factory models, blah, 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 and we keep talking about it. But again, these are the powerful mindsets that are still embedded within our structures today. And that really, again, when you begin to think about the 19th century and with the immigration that was taking place, with the industrialization that was taking place, that as it states there, and leading thinkers during that time said, we have to break the inherent free human spirit that kids show. So we create these structures. So why did grade levelness come about? What's the neurological reason to have a grade level? Or what's the social reason? So really the grade levelness came about because it was an industrial approach to create this hierarchy to be able to control kids in small groups and clusters by putting them all at the same age level. So you need to think about that from a structural point of view. And that came about, that's why it's difficult. When I was superintendent, I did get a building to totally go to a non-graded approach. And I mean, as I said, when I was superintendent, one of the things that my greatest accomplishment was getting a group in that elementary building that went that way to go to the school board and ask to have the walls knocked out between their classrooms. And the board granted that. That was back in 2003. And I do have the video to prove it, that the walls were knocked out. So I can show you that stuff. But it was interesting because, again, I challenged them for a couple of years to think about where does this idea of grade levelness come from? So now you want to know why standardized testing? Well, it's easy to do that. So you got these little blocks of where kids are in first grade or fifth grade or where seventh grade or whatever it is. So you can, assess and get feedback much easier. It's a very, very industrial approach to doing things. And then leading thinkers, set out to create an environment for kids where they could be forcefully trained to be obedient, to follow orders, to perform highly monotonous tasks without rebelling. So Zal talks about that a little bit. Will Richardson talks about that. A lot of people talk about that. That again, okay, where did it come from? Well, remember I said to you, we're all products of this system. This is what we know. And I remember, and I went to Catholic school, and I remember I learned how to be obedient with a ruler. And I don't know if any of you guys went through that. Today, it's, corporal punishment's outlawed in a lot of places. But that's what it was all about. That's where it came from. And then also, this led really to this idea of, leading forth, as that Oxford Dictionary was, to what schooling is today. So I want you to be aware of those constructs that drive, and that, again, we had mass education was necessary. And so tracking came into play. you began to organize that. Then in the turn of the century, when the IQ test started to become part of that, the IQ test was mainly, in the beginning, was used for the military. World War I. Then it became a major, Binet and his group, that became a way of sorting kids, again, based off of these intelligence quotas. And then the 3 R's were the predominant component, because what you wanted to make sure is on a factory line is that you could understand basic instructions, you could do rudimentary writing, and you could do simple office tasks. So I want you to think about where and why we're there and why it's difficult to make these changes, because these are the underlying assumptions that have driven us for 200 years. And until we expose them, and to get conversation about that with politicians, with business people, with community people, that, again, this is where Theory U comes in. How do you let go of the downloading in order to look at new possibilities for the future? So that's my challenge to you as curriculum leaders, as superintendents, as people who will have responsibility for kids living in the 22nd century. So I'll put it that way. So those concepts are important. Now, let's add some more complexity to it. So what do we do with this stuff right now? And I'm going to show you a couple things. I got a short clip from a movie you might have seen, but I just want to show this to you to kind of get a sense of what this is
When you
about.
think of automation, you probably think of this: giant, custom-built, expensive, efficient, but really dumb robots, blind to the world and their own work. They were a scary kind of automation, but they haven't taken over the world because they're only cost-effective in narrow situations. But they're the old kind of automation. This is the new kind. Meet Baxter. Unlike these things, which require skilled operators and technicians and millions of dollars, Baxter has vision and can learn what you want him to do by watching you do it. And he costs less than the average annual salary of a human worker. Unlike his older brothers, he isn't pre-programmed for one specific job. He can do whatever work is within the reach of his arms. Baxter is what might be thought of as a general-purpose robot, and general purpose is a big deal. Think computers. They too started out as highly custom and highly expensive, but when cheap-ish general-purpose computers appeared, they quickly became vital to everything. A general-purpose computer can just as easily calculate change, or assign seats on an airplane, or play a game, or do anything just by swapping its software. And this huge demand for computers of all kinds is what makes them both more powerful and cheaper every year. Baxter today is the computer of the 1980s. He's not the apex, but the beginning. Even if Baxter is slow, his hourly cost is pennies worth of electricity, while his meat-based competition costs minimum wage. A tenth the speed is still cost-effective when it's 100th the price. And while Baxter isn't as smart as some of the other things we will talk about, he's smart enough to take over many low-skilled jobs. And we've already seen how dumber robots than Baxter can replace jobs. In new supermarkets, what used to be 30 humans is now one human overseeing 30 cashier robots. Or take the hundreds of thousands of baristas employed worldwide. There's a barista robot coming for them. Sure, maybe your guy makes the double mocha whatever just perfect and you'd never trust anyone else, but millions of people don't care and just want a decent cup of coffee. Oh, and by the way, this robot is actually a giant network of robots that remembers who you are and how you like your coffee no matter where you are. Pretty convenient.
So, I don't know if you've seen the Humans Need Not Apply on YouTube. Make sure you see it. It runs for 15 minutes, gives you the whole picture of what's going on. But here's what I want to throw in here. So again, Mitra, who is the one who did the hole-in-the-wall computer in India and really found some very interesting stuff. Look at his TED presentation, and you want to get a good sense of what's going on. But again, here's what he says. The Victorians, they're great engineers, and they created a system that's still with us today, and it's producing the same type of sausage using young Zal's approach that, no longer exists, that we want more variety. So I want you to think about that, because here's the next thing then. So what automation is doing, and by the way, Baxter, when I first saw that, year and a half ago, 2 years ago, that particular clip, the next week, because I get Wall Street Journal, and I get it because Wall Street Journal, their editorials, I don't like their editorials, but their news is phenomenal. And there was a picture in the business section of Baxter. And it had a full article on how Baxter is going to replace and is replacing people. And if you notice, he said the meat-based competition, Baxter costs $25,000. And when you have a lot of Baxters there, you don't need a lot of those people in Ohio or in Pennsylvania or, any of the industrialized states. And that's really where the problem lies today. So what this automation is going to do to your students, and this is what becomes extremely important, and I'll show you some data in a couple minutes that will help you to think about this, is that between 45 and 47% of the jobs that are here today will be gone within 7 or 8 years. So I think that's important. I think it's important for educators to begin to grapple with that and what it means to the economy. And so these things become important. And then also, so if you want to look at this, here's what our politicians, our educators need to think about. So when you think about driverless vehicles, they're real. They're not going away. They're going to be there. My son-in-law is a truck driver. And what's so interesting, since I'm exposed to this, he's constantly asking me, when is it going to happen? Because he sees it happening in the industry. Matter of fact, when he was in between jobs, he used to drive a trash truck. And what was so interesting about the last trash truck he was driving was it had a robotic arm. So it only needed him driving the truck. And he would tell me, he told me the story, one day he's driving through New Holland, he's picking up with his robotic arm, and a woman came out screaming at him for taking away jobs. Now, I want you to think about that, because when you look at this data on the bottom, that AI, basically, what we're talking about is, it's not, managing other people, robots aren't going to do that. So about 9% jobs are going to be lost in those areas based off of the data we have so far. Applying expertise, specialized expertise, maybe 18% at this time being. But as AI gets stronger and stronger, then that number might change. Stakeholder interactions, 20%. But you already have some hospitals that have robots dispensing drugs to patients. So you're beginning to see that. Unpredictable physical work, the type of work that a robot cannot do because of the physical terrain or whatever, 25%. But data collection, your tax person, collecting data, even in law offices, et cetera, data collection, data processing, and predictable physical work, 64 to 78% of those jobs are going to go away. Now, if you notice, I said something. I said law offices. What do you think the purpose of Watson's all about in the medical field, in tax preparation field? I open up I think it's my either the Weather Channel app on my phone. At the bottom of it is the Watson symbol, because they use Watson for predicting weather and stuff. So my point, what I'm bringing this up for you to start thinking about is that, okay, you're going to start designing a curriculum that, is going to prepare these kids for the world of work. The problem is the majority of these kids that are going to be moving into this world, these jobs that we presently have our curriculum designed around are not going to prepare them for what future jobs are. So that's why Yang Zhao talks about entrepreneurship. That's why he talks about you don't want project-based learning, you want product-based learning. You want kids to produce something that they can literally sell, or it has some social value to it. So again, I don't know if you can read this right now. This was done by Citicorp in 2016. So what it was looking at is the accelerating rate of how AI and automation is going to take away jobs in relationship to this. But what's important is at the bottom, 47% of U.S. jobs are at risk for automation, but are not all cities have the same risk. So if you look at Boston, D.C., all the way up to San Francisco, you're looking at the prediction as that within the next 10 years, you're looking at 41.7% of jobs on those not at risk. That's how many jobs will be lost in those major metropolitan areas. Look at the ones that are most at risk. Matter of fact, we have two on there. We have Harrisburg, 47.1%, and Reading, 48.4% of jobs being lost. So if you're teaching in Pennsylvania and you're teaching in areas, so for example, in Hershey, they have that whole plant that is basically driven by robotics. So the question is the curriculum that your school presently has, is it going to prepare kids for a world that the jobs aren't going to be there, not through any fault of their own, it's just the changing nature of economics and the world in general. So, did you guys have to read in 802 this book? Second Machine Age?
No.
Okay. So you guys didn't have me for 802. So I have them read this book. And they actually have a newer one out, not of this one. And in that video, Humans Need Not Apply, basically gives you the synopsis of this book by these two gentlemen from MIT. But here's what they're saying, the policy issues that are related to automation, innovation, and humans. So if you look at really what they say the primary school that we should be looking at for this coming age is Montessori. The Montessori, so if you look at the major entrepreneurial people who are running our economy now, so the head of Amazon, Musk from Solar City and Tesla, and many of the other major entrepreneurial people, they're all graduates from Montessori schools. That they make a very strong case that what we need to do is to really create a school system that is focused on those things I talked about, adaptability, diversity, before in that other slide. And here's what they say. We need digital models of teaching and of learning and teaching, not just technology overlay over our old models. And when you think about the infusion of technology into your schools, my general assumption about that is it hasn't changed much. Might change some relationships and some connections that you can make, but the system, the day is the same, the teacher's work day is the same, the kids' work day is the same, the schedule's the same, etc. Now we're beginning to see some inroads like with flipped classrooms, etc. But the problem is we should be looking at how the technology can reshape how the curriculum or the flow of information within the curriculum is all about. That's what they're saying. They also are saying entrepreneurship is the best way to create jobs and opportunity. That's Young Zhao also. Zhao saying the exact same thing. So is your curricular structure set up that encourages that starting at kindergarten? So if you look at a Montessori approach, or a Steinert approach, or a couple of those ones that are outliers, these are the types of curricular structures and pedagogy we need to be looking at. And then we have to make more matches, find ways to reduce the friction and the cost and make it difficult to match people with jobs. So they're talking about, we have to support science, we have to upgrade our infrastructure, and we must tax and tax wisely. So this book, I would strongly recommend you to get a hold of and to download on Kindle. It is a very, very interesting book that will give you a pretty good sense of what the data is really saying about the emerging economy and what policy issues we need to look at in relationship to our schools and the type of learning that's going to be necessary for these kids to survive in this world. So think about what Otto Scharmer talked about in terms of the 3 divides in relationship to self to nature, self to others, and self to self. So again, just some stuff that I want to throw out there for you to really begin to think about in relationship to, okay, what's curriculum have to look like? Any thoughts on what I've given you so far about the wild card of technology? Or you're so blown away, you don't know what to say. And that's okay. Just, I really want you to process this as I hit you with this stuff, and then let it percolate, and then within your teams, talk about it. And then if you have questions, feel free at any time, to email me, etc. So the guiding principle is basically this, is that coming out of 800 and the iceberg, it is so important for you to have this ingrained and etched in your thinking. Structure affects behavior of people over time, period. It's what does it. Now, that's rather behavioralistic, but it's okay, because the structure we work in, really affects how we think about things, how we do things. The structure of a person's classroom has a lot to say to the kid about what learning's all about. So one of the reasons I got you going through Gredler is to begin to get a good handle on the underlying principles of learning that are out there and that have some impact on the way in which we teach, but also the way in which we organize information. So again, guiding principle for you: structure affects the behavior of people over time. So the structure of the curriculum that your team designs has to think about what type of behaviors will that structure create, both in the adults that are interacting with that structure and the kids that interact with that structure. Okay, so let me just I'm going to give you a real quick overview of a curriculum when I was superintendent that I got people to start looking at, and we started implementing parts of it, particularly that one school I told you about. So if you begin to think about a metaphor to start thinking about if we look at the kids and we look at these concepts that Will Richardson talks about, Young Zhao talks about, Linda Darling-Hammonds, all those people I am exposing you to. So entrepreneurship, global collaboration, community-based creativity, et cetera, how then could we integrate and design a curriculum around science, technology, arts, ecological components, economic sustainability? How would we do that? Well, my suggestion is that one way is you got to change the metaphor that we're working under. And so one way that I really started suggesting, getting people to think about, is that if we started thinking about our schools as seed beds and kids as seeds, how does that change the way in which we start thinking about the structural components and the assumptions that would drive our schools? So one way I started playing around with is that, if you notice, I did away with grade levelness, and I reorganized the way in which we would think about the flow of information. Now, I'm not going to take you through all these. I'll take you through one, though, to give you kind of a sense what I'm looking at. So the idea here is that to one extent, high school would end around 16 years of age, and that we would create new relationships with other types of learning organizations, whether it be colleges, universities, community colleges, apprenticeships, businesses, or whatever, NGOs, it doesn't matter. So that now structurally gives you a different way of looking at it. But again, I'm looking at a school as a place where we nurture kids as seeds, and that we're kind of gardeners, and that sometimes certain types of plants you nurture differently than other types of plants. Now maybe it's because I live out in Lancaster County and there's farms all over the place, but this is a way of starting to think about it. So my assumptions that you would begin to look at, and again, this is a way for your team to start thinking about this, is that if you look at that first box, then it's really saying it's not designed for just content acquisition. It's designed to really develop thinking, and it's interdisciplinary and it's multi-age. So I kind of define what thinking is. It's creating, analyzing assumptions, ideas. It really comes out of the work on concept attainment and concept development. And that what learning is the ability to construct new assumptions. So think about that, new mindsets. So one of the reasons, if you think about what I had you do week 1, was kind of expose some of your assumptions about what a curriculum is. So the question will be, at the end of 10 weeks, has there been shifts in your thinking about the nature of what curriculum is, and possibly a shift in your own mental models about what should be this interaction between thinking and communicating, because communicating really is the way in which we express our ideas. But you're going to see I'm not defining communication as just writing something down or saying something. You'll see that in a couple of seconds. And then the instructional environment is, I really believe that systems thinking approach, and there are many school districts in this country that belong to a group called Camp Snowball. So you can look up Camp Snowball. Matter of fact, it's either this week or next week in New Jersey, their major yearly gathering, first time on the East Coast. But these schools are integrating system thinking activities at all levels of learning. So another source that, if you want to look at finding out how you integrate systems thinking, is the Waters Foundation, which is based in Pittsburgh. So look at Camp Snowball, look up the Waters Foundation. But again, systems thinking is a major component of this. Essential questions drive it. So if you go to Jay McTighe and Grant Wiggins' material, designing curriculum, backwards. But again, what drives that is, what are the essential questions that our students need to know in order to solve real issues? And then the activities are networked with other schools, communities, both that way. So, okay, those would be, the framework. So I'm just going to show you just one. So that tools of expression. So here's what happens then. These are what 4 to 7-year-old kids grouped together will be dealing. They're learning to develop literacy through notational systems. And I'll show you that in a second. The content information is organized around thematic activities. Themes are organized around both early childhood development concepts and a framework of sensitive to learning styles. You begin to explore those ideas of how different kids learn and their style of learning. So you might want to explore Gardner's work. You might want to explore, the different types of learning style, Anthony Gregoric, the Duns, people like that. But here, the children learn to communicate through the use of different forms of expression, and they ask questions as they construct knowledge. So what's underlying this is a constructivist point of view. So you can go back to Piaget, who you will look at, Vygotsky, Seymour Papert, and people of that ilk, and also John Seeley Brown, who deals with situated cognition. Now, I'm throwing these ideas out for you because as a curriculum person, you need to have a handle on this, because you want to make arguments why we shouldn't just have standardized curriculum. You better have some pretty good understanding of the different frameworks that are out there in order to make your case. So, one-on-one skill development, small group activities designed to develop the attitude of social cooperation and responsibility. And so what happens is what I've done here is, and the neurosciences are beginning to really, say that this works, that typically this is what we do in schools. We teach the ABCs, which lead to words, which leads to sentences, and then we teach them numerical representation of ideas, 1, 2, 3s, which leads to operations, which leads to formulas. So that's generally what we teach. Reading and mathematics. They are the king and queen of elementary curriculum. All the other stuff is, secondary to the process. But in the digital age and in the world in which we're moving into, we probably should redefine literacy by adding in color, which leads to, art, design, shapes, which leads to design. We should also integrate musical notation, which are chords, which leads to phrases. And then the last one is we should be also putting in movement. So physical movement, dance, our physical activities that we do in sports, etc. But I'm looking at it more from the point of view of bodily expression to express my ideas and thoughts, which leads to presentation. So if you think about this, and I always use the example of sentence diagramming. So if you think about sentence diagramming, if you did that when you went to school, or if your schools are still doing it, what it does is it breaks down a sentence so you see the interrelationship of those words. Well, what is a mathematical formula? It is a sentence structure. It shows the relationship of those operations, whether it be commutative, associative, distributed properties. It gets kids to see that those two are sentence structures, but also like in chemistry. So if you teach a chemical formula to a kid, you're teaching them a sentence. You're teaching them a structure of a sentence. Now, when you get into art and you begin to look at how kids express ideas on social media today, their use of music to express idea, their use of color and sound, etc., these probably are the types of literacies that we need to address. So what we're talking about is, because the brain works with symbols, is that we need to redefine our literacy, probably by adding in these additional areas, and that would be art, music, and physical education as primary subject matters. Now, I just want you to digest that and think about it. But I will tell you that there is enough neurological research coming out that's really supporting that. And the other person I would suggest that you look at, and I think I have some of her stuff in the material in some of those tabs. If I don't, I have it in there. Is a psychologist, neuropsychologist, Adele Diamond, up in Canada, who does a lot of work with very young kids on executive functioning powers to really get them to exhibit what you probably would think the type of behavior that you would not see until high school. Because now we're beginning to understand the brain more and more, and that makes a difference. That's why I have you looking at the neurology, the autonomy, the of the anatomy of the brain in that chapter 3 in Gredler's book, and got you looking at a couple videos that are beginning to explain that. Because as curriculum people, you need to start looking at what the brain research is starting to say about the learning process, because it's radically starting to shift our understanding from behavioralism to different approaches. So that is what I have there for you. And then finally, in this model, we get rid of the concept of teacher, and we really begin to look at learning, I'm calling them learning space facilitators. And these are the types of things that our LSFs would need to know, or teachers really need to know. They have to understand how to make the environment much more open. You know, they have to be driven by a passion for inquiry themselves. They must be content. They have to have content expertise. That's very important. And they have to have a good sense of their source of why they facilitate the learning of other people. So, kind of wrapping this up, there's a lot here, is that basically this is what I want you really to start doing a deep dive into thinking about the structured curriculum, thinking about this whole debate that's going on around standards, thinking about what the people I'm exposing to you are saying, and then particularly looking at those things in Gredler. So what you do with your check for understanding is you have 2 people to look at in context each week, and then you pick one that's more like you, and then you explain, you know, you can do it in, you know, obviously in Audacity or however you want to do it. Just explain, okay, this is why, you know, I kind of migrate to what's going on there. So follow what I have, you know, in the syllabus. That's all you have to do. So let's end here with, okay, what questions or thoughts that you have given what I've given you so far for tonight to end this?
I enjoyed all the content. I'm looking forward to my group and I coming up with our vision of what a school could look like. So it's exciting to hear, and I can tell that you're excited about it. Like you definitely display your passion in sharing this, and I appreciate that.
Good, thank you. I'm a very frustrated ex-superintendent.
We all feel the same way, and you just give us a glimpse of hope.
We'll see. I'll try to give you the tools, but as I say, yeah, you know, I'm at the end. You guys are at the beginning, so carry on. Thank you. So any other questions, thoughts, or, you know, anything, you know, that you need any clarification before we end? So since there is none, wait, I see a chat. Let me just see what's up here on the chat stuff here. Anything I need to look at? I didn't have it up. Okay. All right. So that's basically it. I am going to stop the recording. And as usual, you guys can